In the last 2 decades, governments around the world have seen the beauty and the power of technology through e-governance projects that they have been deploying. And they have also seen the power of maybe resources and tools like crowdsourcing and cloud computing. And today, I think they are ready to really grab the opportunity that big data is going to offer to them. So that is as far as the readiness of the governments is there. So you as technology people can believe that in the coming 2 decades, governments are going to seriously lap up what you have to offer if you have tools and techniques and technologies in this space. Now let me get a little more specific. After I landed in the US, I got to visit almost 5-6 federal departments. Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, Housing, and in all these departments we discovered through our discussions that big data is going to play a fairly big role. And that was 6 months ago. And today, I am sure you people have read the reports that the government of the United States has allocated $200 million for an initiative called Big Data Research and Development Initiative, and 6 federal departments are going to work on this. So obviously, US is hoping to retain its competitive edge by capitalizing on this new phenomenon called the big data. Well, it's not without a reason that US is looking at it seriously, because if you go back and remember the early 60s, United States government has set aside a huge amount of money for research in ICT and also in networks. And that led to supercomputing and also the discovery of internet. So US is very strong in that. Now let me give you an example from Australia. I said that governments are overwhelmingly protective about their national assets, right? So I'll give an example from what's happening in Australia. Australian government recently has announced a multi-million-dollar geothermal energy project. And this geothermal energy project is not a regular project, it is a big data project. So what makes it a big data project? See, if you look at geothermal energy, it's done in most of the countries. But if you see the landscape of Australia, it is a fantastic case for big data, because the geothermal energy that is mined from under the ground, essentially it's all about rocks that completely get heated up. In the case of Australia, the rocks are spread all over the country, and they are not near the surface at all. They are almost 4 kilometers down in the ground, and also covered by rocks that are not heated, which means the rocks above the heated rocks have to be drilled through to access these rocks that are hot. And what is happening in Australia is they have very categorically understood this as a big data project, because they know that they are dealing with a huge volume of data. They have to deal with a huge velocity of data, and they have to deal with a huge variety of data, which is nothing but the 3 cornerstones or 3 characteristics of big data. Australian government has understood it has to understand the gravity data. It has to look at the electromagnetic energy coming from the sun and piercing different layers in the earth, hitting at different frequencies. That has to be captured. Australian government has understood magnetic data has to be captured. Not only that, the seismic data in the ground has to be captured. Now take a look at this. Data from totally different sources. And you ask experts, they say this data is unstructured and semi-structured. A complete case of big data. So here we have a multi-million-dollar project that our Australian government is talking about. Now let me give you another example from UK, London. I read somewhere, I don't recall, I don't want to talk about the report, but it stayed in my mind that researchers said that UK is going to gain something like 200 billion pounds in the coming few years if it deploys big data analytics. and maybe around 60,000 jobs are going to be created. So that's a good promise for UK. So yesterday when I had a friend of mine visiting me, he's a medical doctor by profession, he's an orthopedician, I asked him about what he thinks of big data. First of all, I was skeptical whether he knew or heard the word big data. You'll be really surprised to know the minute I mentioned it, he not only knew what it meant, he also knew how his government is going to very soon use the technology very soon. He gave me an example that in UK today, he claims that UK has the largest joint registry in the world, the medical information. And he gave an example of a national cancer intelligence network. So essentially a huge network that draws information from all the regional cancer networks, collects information on treatment protocols, diagnostics, prognostics, drugs, maybe even drug markers, and reimbursement details and insurance, everything on one network. And if a member demands anything, they are going to get information on an interactive map. And this is just one example in cancer. There are 10 other areas like non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular problems, diabetes. They can have their own intelligence networks, and tomorrow the nation can look at integrating all the networks and optimize their service provision in such a way that the government can save money and perhaps use it in other areas. So this is as far as UK is concerned. Now let me give you another example from Europe itself. In Europe, you have something called European Energy Agency. I'm sure most of you would have heard about it, because basically energy is discussed a whole lot all over the world. And every little piece of data that relates to environment is collected, be it indicators on air pollution, noise pollution, water, and geospatial data. Everything is collected on this. And if somebody requests for information, it is going to be again presented to them on an interactive map, and they use Bing maps for this. So we talked about different countries, their efforts, but let me tell you that this is just a sample of what's happening in the government space. Now I work in the area of cities, and we have been striving to see that cities deploy technologies to ensure predictability of city life. So what I have been seeing over the last 10 years is that in cities we have seen technologies that have been deployed in sectors, like sectoral investments have been made. For instance, a transportation had been made intelligent. Go to Seattle, you will see that. Maybe a power grid has been made smart. You will see that in some cities. You will see maybe water utilities having made smart in some cities. But just imagine what big data can do in terms of, if you have traffic sensors, if you have pollution sensors, water sensors, doling out data, huge amount of data from the smart grids. All of that can be stored, collated, mined for value, and a city can be planned brilliantly. Today we are making investments based on very little information that the government agencies have. They are not data driven. But imagine if all this smart sectoral smartness can contribute to the whole smartness of a city, then the countries are going to optimize and hugely save up. So I'd like to say that there's a huge potential for people who are going to work in this area, and government will perhaps be the biggest customer that you can think of. There are of course challenges in terms of privacy and security of individual information. The governments have to learn to understand how to do that. Then governments will also have challenges in seeking information from the private sector firms, because it's proprietary information they will not be able to give. The third challenge that I see that governments facing is lack of human capital. Now tell me how many people are qualified to work in the area of big data. So perhaps governments will have to fund for technical training, And also, the domain expertise has to be built in different sectors. I was talking to a friend of mine, a utility expert in the United States, and he was so upbeat about big data. But when I asked him certain probing questions, he told me that, yes, along with technical expert from IT, we will need domain experts who will perhaps help with the structured and unstructured data that gets thrown up periodically. So these could be the the challenges that the government has. Now let me conclude. I have been reading that big data is being called maybe the top trend. Big data has been called a scientific revolution. Big data also has been called the game-changing asset. I would like to believe it is a game-changing asset because governments today have the opportunity to revisit their assumptions, rework their strategies, and come and deal with perhaps the most compelling and most difficult problems the world is facing in terms of maybe terrorism and even poverty alleviation. Imagine we just 7 billion people, but out of that maybe 6 billion can be categorized as poor. If data can help, so be it. So what I foresee is this. Developed economies like the United States and maybe the Europe will deploy big data to remain competitive in the global arena. Nations like Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, and maybe even Singapore, nations that are known for transparency and corrupt-free governments, will start using big data in a big way to retain their position as nations that have been clean and countries that have been constantly growing, showing almost 7% of growth in their GDPs annually. Like for instance, the BRIC nations, Brazil, India, Russia, China, even Argentina. Indonesia can perhaps deploy big data to continue to grow. That is what I foresee. So I also believe that big data has an equity, there's a value. Like just like a brand has value, there's an economic component to data. So you people are perhaps those, if you get trained to mine for value, you will really change the face of the world. All the way.